fascinating. It's this really weird kind of dreamscape, but also this kind of brutal emotional reality. I mean, how do you manage to combine the two?
It's a really good question. Thank you, first of all. It's weird for me to know that people are listening to the record, because obviously I've sat on it for a bit of time. And you kind of get to the point where you sort of think, oh, well, people might just not ever hear it. I don't think it was a kind of conscious decision to combine anything. I think it's just a very natural expression of what I do when I write, the things that I'm interested in, the records that I love, the production that I'm interested in. And I think, the same with Confessions. I never want to be held down or kind of kept to one particular sound. I think it must be really boring to be in a band that's expected to just do one thing. And I always remember actually reading an interview with Patrick Wolf, I don't know if you remember him, and him saying the reason he made his first album so eclectic was because he wanted to kind of set a precedent to say, this is what I do all of these different things. So it's been a real blessing, I think, to have made that mark with Confessions, and like you say, continued on that road in terms of having a variety of sounds to explore. But I think there's more cohesion on this record. It's darker, obviously, because of the subject matter. But I think, because I was writing, producing it on my own, there's a consistency across the 14 tracks. I think because it's my hand, it's me playing pretty much everything. So yeah, I feel really pleased with it, and I never feel like that about anything that I do. I'm always very hyper self-critical, but I can honestly say there's not one thing that I would change about the record. I just feel so proud of it, and if I had to hold up one thing for the rest of my life that kind of said, this is what I've done with my life, I feel that sounds like a big thing to say, but when you're contemplating, obviously when I was making the record, I was really unwell and didn't know what the outcome of that was going to be. So there were points when I was thinking, this might be what I leave behind. So it sounds a bit bleak, but that was my reality. So yeah, I'm really pleased that it's finally going to be out there.
I mean, in what way were you unwell?
I probably haven't talked about this very much. So after the couple of years that I'd had with my dad dying and then experiencing a series of baby losses, I was diagnosed with cervical cancer a couple of days before Christmas, when I was right in the middle of making the record, which was just really the icing on the cake, I think, and not a nice cake. I was very lucky that they caught it early, but obviously I think it was within a couple of days I was in having treatment. It was incredibly quick. But obviously that changes your perspective on everything, because suddenly you're faced with your own mortality, and that is, it's not something someone of my age should have to think about. It was just a real wake-up call as well, in terms of, I don't want to get too kind of mystical on it, but I don't think it was any coincidence that was how my body chose to process what I had been through physically over the preceding years. I was talking to someone about this the other day. Losing a baby is a very physically gruesome as well experience, and I think often when it's talked about, we kind of highlight the emotional aspects. You feel really sad, and the grief and the depression and the trauma of it, but also the physicality of it too. And I was very unlucky in that I ended up having to have several operations each time as well, because things went quite wrong. So that's very physically traumatic, and obviously that was all centered in this kind of same area. And the way I have made sense of it all is to think, if you've ever read the book, The Body Keeps Score, which is about how trauma inscribes itself on the physical body. And for me, my way of making sense of that was to think, this has happened because of what I've been through. And also, so I've got nice little pictures of I could be really flippant about it, and this is just my way of how I process it. I had pictures of my diseased cervix, pictures of the growth on it, and that was just so strange. And rather than, I think, run in the other direction from it, I'd be like sending pictures of it to other people and just be like, this is a bit of a weird selfie, isn't it? It's quite intimate. So yeah, that was part of my experience of making the record, and felt kind of very apt, I think, in some ways.
I mean, it was easy to be obviously confronting it full on, but also in a sense an escape as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, I wrote something for The Quietist recently about this idea that, as writers, all of us, anyone that makes or creates something, we're all trying to defy our own mortality, aren't we? As if by writing something down, we will exist beyond our physical presence on the earth. But yeah, I mean, I'm a workaholic, so for me, having the album to make was something that I could pour myself into. It was some certainty amidst this chaos that was happening around me. I knew that I could be productive and do something, and that there would be, I'd have something to show for it at the end of the day. And I love my work. I really enjoy what I do, and I've been supremely lucky to have the studio in my house as well. So I've been able to work when I want to and when I feel able to. So that's been a real gift.
So do you get to the point there's like a really weird sort of contradiction when you're doing a song confronting your own mortality and death, but by doing it, you kind of escape from those thoughts at the same time, because the sonic construction of it, you're lost inside the sound, and there's both things playing at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely contradictory, isn't it, as well? And I don't think it was ever that conscious. I mean, the songs are already as such written for the most part, but I was certainly wanting to confront ideas around death and grieving. I was less interested in, writing a record that expressed my feelings. That was not something that I wanted to do. Someone like Nick Cave's done that supremely well. It's beautiful album, but I wanted to do something that was more challenging, both formally and sonically. So that's a big reason why the record's quite upbeat, quite up tempo, and probably quite surprising for, if you say, oh, this is a record about grief, death and loss, you're expecting, kind of somber ballads. And that's not what it is at all. I was much more interested in doing, similarly to what the Manics did on the Holy Bible, exploring the ideas around death. There's a song on the album, All Farewells Should Be Sudden, that sort of looks at the different kind of religious constructions of the afterlife. So it's the ideas that interest me. The reason why I'm the Anchoress and not Catherine Aed or Catherine Ann Davies is because I'm not interested in that kind of unfiltered expression of the self. And that, again, it must be hugely because I'm such a Manics fan that I've been brought up on that idea that ideas are more interesting to me. So yeah, it's not a diary as such. It's more of an exploration of the things that were happening and what that was kind of leading me to explore and research, I guess.
That's quite interesting. So these are powerful, very personal ideas, but they're dealt with by creating a character in a sense. So that's what I find fascinating about your records. That, like I said initially, it is like a dream time, but they're very, very raw and emotional. And there's two things playing at the same time, which is maybe the core of what makes what you're doing so fascinating.
Thank you. That's probably me as a person as well, because I think I am both of those things at once. I'm very rational and very sometimes obtusely logical because of the way my brain works, but also obviously incredibly I guess I'm quite an overly sensitive person at the same time, and it's always about keeping those two things in balance. So it's no accident that I guess my music would probably encapsulate both those polar opposites. Yes, were you talking about yourself in the kind of from the outside and looking down?
Yeah, but that's kind of what but isn't that what your record does in a way?
Yes, you're probably right. Well, I think that's the thing that's what's so helpful about having the Anchoress as a character. It kind of enables me to separate myself out. The Anchoress is interested in these ideas as a third person. She's the one delving into the library, pulling out these books on, burial rituals and like the afterlife in Buddhism and, all of, reincarnation. And that's what she can be separate from the human being that's going through these things.
What do you think of the Anchoress as a if it was a person? Would you find her fascinating, interesting, annoying, or
I find myself very annoying. So yeah, it's just been a really helpful construct, I think, to have that slight separation. I think especially when you're putting music out there in the world, sometimes I've always had this rule of not reading reviews, because when you are so at the center of what you do, and it is not, you're not in a band, you are the sole creator of this, it can sometimes feel like a kind of criticism of your core self when people don't like what you do. So I think that the Anchoress has been really helpful to kind of distance myself from any obviously there's always going to be people that aren't into, the music that you're making, and I've just found that a really nice construct that I can sit comfortably in, and it means I can do lots of different things as well. I can get away with putting on a smile when I don't feel like it, or dressing up in a certain way. I don't wander around my house in PVC. I'm very comfortable. My life to believe that I do. Maybe when I'm cleaning the kitchen.
But the Anchoress can, but you don't.
Yeah, she does when she comes over to clean, because I've got can't have anyone clean, so she has to get the PVC pinny out and do under the cupboards.
So when you're singing something that's really raw and emotional, does that go? Which character would that be in? Does the Anchoress give you the empowerment to do that as you, or do you do it detached, or is it? I mean, it must be incredibly difficult to be that open and honest about things as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think when I toured with Simple Minds and I supported them, and I was singing songs every single night that I'd written and felt very emotionally raw, that was really difficult, and you have to steel yourself as a performer to some extent, but equally you also want to be giving your all emotionally, and it's a tightrope walk. I'm not sure I've got the answer to that. In a way, that's why I hate to say it, it has been an element of relief about not being able to tour at the moment, because I'm not sure how I would feel about going out and performing these songs quite yet. By 2022, I'm sure that will feel as if it's something I can manage. But yeah, it's an emotional tightrope walk. I think it's the same for any performer, though, who is singing about things that are incredibly personal and raw. I know that Bjork, for instance, on her last tour ended up kind of calling things to a halt because she just felt it wasn't good for her mental health. But I think it's a really responsible thing to do, and I think it's important that we see examples of artists kind of saying, here's my boundary, I'm not crossing that. I've learned a lot from that over the past few years about looking after myself first and foremost, and not and I wasn't sharing what I was going through at the time with people online. It's only been after the fact, when I got a bit of distance from it, that I feel able to talk about it. It's not something you want to share as it's happening in real time. Well, not for me anyway. And everyone's different, aren't they? But that's my experience.
I mean, obviously, because the physical and emotional manifestations, what you went through, are very difficult for anybody. I can't even imagine how difficult that is to go through as a human being. But do you wish? I mean, obviously, you wish that those things had never happened. But as in life terms. But what about creative terms? Would you sometimes wish I could just sing about cleaning the kitchen, or hoovering the carpet, or what a great sunny day it is?
I don't think I'll ever sing about those things necessarily, but I'd planned an album completely, around different themes. And it certainly wasn't the record I had planned to make. And I think whatever is happening to you in your life obviously will always inform where you're kind of pushed creatively. I don't know, it's one of those kind of impossible things to reflect on. My favourite film is Arrival by de Villeneuve, which talks about that kind of very conundrum. If you knew that your path would be this painful and would lead to suffering and loss, would you still choose make the same decisions? And I think that it's never all of one thing and nothing of the other, despite having gone through a tremendous amount of pain and unhappiness. I've also gained a lot too, and that's sort of what the record wanted to interrogate too. It's like, what do we gain when we lose? Yes, obviously it really hurts, but there are so many amazing friendships that I have found and formed because of this. My sense of myself is just completely different. I was a child before, and I feel like I've really evolved and matured, and also my sense of my own resilience as well. There's a lot to gain from it. It's not a black and white thing about saying, I wish it hadn't happened. It's impossible to know where I would be in my life if that wasn't the case.
I guess life is what it is, isn't it? And it's how you deal with what's thrown at you. With the music, that gave you something to deal with it, or would you be able to deal with it without the music as well? I guess that's another impossible question, isn't it?
Well, it's sort of one of the questions actually I probed on my podcast a little bit on season 1, where I was talking to other artists, so writers, journalists, authors, poets. I spoke to Patrick Jones, for instance, Nicky Wire's brother, about his, how he'd used poetry to kind of cope with the loss of his mother, and then obviously his father subsequently. And what I found really fascinating was all of these people in different creative fields had completely different answers to whether or not they found it helpful that they were creative in the midst of it. Some of them couldn't write, some of them didn't want to write, some of them found it the way to process what was happening to them. And that was just so fascinating for me to not only realise that, to be honest, pretty much every human being has to deal with death, and it's incredibly, I don't know if you would call yourself lucky if you had no one to care about to lose. So this is a universal experience, and how lucky we are as people who write or author our own kind of work to have that means of processing it. I think it's the processing, actually, that I've come to realise has the value. It's not like a cathartic experience. It's not, I wrote it down the page and then I don't have to deal with it anymore. It's like writing is a means to understand what you've been through, and it's the understanding, processing that is of value, because it never goes away, but you have a better grasp of it.
It's curious how death is dealt with in Western cultures, isn't it? It's like it doesn't exist. When somebody famous dies, people are completely shocked. Like, how could that possibly happen to Elvis? But it's part of life, isn't it? It's like being born, being here, doing the things that we do, and it's equal part of our lives, isn't it? And do you think that's like almost like a weird psychological problem that we have in the West? Because you go to India, death is very much part of life in India. It's they're waiting to die to move up or down.
Exactly. And this is something, during my research I was finding this too, so many anthropological kind of explanations for how we deal with death. And the reason we bury people 6 feet under is not just because we were afraid of disease and we needed to have that physical distance, but it's also about the mental and metaphorical distancing from, we felt as if death might be catching, and it's out of sight, out of mind. And to my mind, I think it's much healthier if we kind of confront it. I much prefer the wailing women in, I can't remember which culture it is, that kind of really express their grief very vocally and very kind of performatively in a way that feels much healthier. Certainly when my dad died, I didn't shy away from howling and wailing, and I know that some people found that quite off-putting, but for me it was just about not pushing the emotion away and really engaging with it. My sister wasn't like that at all. She had a completely different reaction, and it's so fascinating to me, just the way that people deal with grief in different ways. There's no one answer, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but I do think Western culture has kind of tended to push it down, quite literally, bury it.
So in a way, the extension of the wailing in a melodic sense is making the music. Yeah.
Get it out, that's what I say. That's what the album cover is about too, it's I've got one here. I don't know if you've seen it, actually.
Oh yeah. It's
so
great. It's a great image.
A lot of people have said to me, am I inhaling the book or am I exhaling the words? And it's supposed to be that ambiguous. It's this idea that I wanted to play with the notion that when we express ourselves emotionally, we're thought of as, it's just a moment of catharsis. You're vomiting up the pages, but actually equally we are as much inhaling the things around us, and those become the words on the page too. And for me, I wanted a visual representation of that ambiguity, how I see our interaction with the world and the experiences around us. It's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of the confessional mode, as in terms of its history and culture, because I do often think, and I remember having this conversation once with Tori Amos, to drop that big name in the conversation, clunk, where she said, women who, she hated the idea that she was a confessional songwriter because to her it was a pejorative term, and she felt that when people say you're confessional, that they are getting rid of the notion that there's any skill involved in that. You're just dumping your thoughts and feelings onto the page or into the song. And she said, there's such a huge amount of filtering, shaping, reshaping, editing, skill and craft that goes into her work. And she loathed people calling her or loathes, present tense, people calling her a confessional singer-songwriter. And I wonder how much of it is a kind of gendered bias, you know, when we laud people like Tom York or Bob Dylan for, you know, wearing their heart on the sleeve, or, you know, opening their wounds and bleeding into their work. It's like these great men of genius. But yet when women do it, it's more often than not, and I never looked at it like this until she pointed out to me, it's like, oh, they're just diarizing. You know, it's just a, you know, women just do that. They're so emotional. And it's so interesting that women's skill craft in confessional songwriting is diminished in that way. So yeah, it's partly railing against that. I mean, that was what the first Anchoress record was about. It was a lot about refusing that idea that women write confessionally. Hence the title, Confessions of a Romance Novelist. I wanted to say, well, what happens if you don't know if it's true or if it's a fiction? If I meld the two together, how are you going to judge me? How are you going to judge my skill? And I'm still really interested in that, you know, of refusing this idea that I'm just diarising, because fuck that. If I was diarising, I could do an album in a week. You know, this is nearly a year of work. You know, this is not easy stuff to craft.
Which kind of brings us to another one of your heroines, Kate Bush. And what I find fascinating about her, I mean, she does that in a sense. It's very much from her soul, but it's so nuanced, and her real craft, and maybe this refers to Tori Amos thing, that shows there is a craft to this, and it is not diarising. It's taking a tiny little idea and extrapolating it out into a huge idea. So some of the angles that she takes and what she writes about are quite mind-blowing, aren't they? And is that one of the things you, as a fan, you found fascinating about her?
To be honest, the thing I love about Kate Bush the most is her production, weirdly. And no one ever talks about her as a producer. I am fascinated by the sonic worlds that she creates. You know, from The Dreaming onwards, to me, there is no one that surpasses her in terms of imagination, in terms of her sonic palette and her creativity. You know, the boundaries that she's pushing, you know, she's right there with Peter Gabriel, or ahead of Peter Gabriel sometimes, you know, in the new technologies that she's incorporating. I'm less interested in her as a singer and as a lyricist. I think you rightly point out, she's not autobiographical. She doesn't write in this mode that we expect women to. She's hugely imaginative. She does a lot of research as well, you know, in a lot of literary references and kind of extrapolation from what she's reading or watching. But no, I'm fascinated with her as a producer, first and foremost. You know, if there was anyone else, if I would ever lay down my producer's hat and let someone else come in again, it would be for her.
Is that because she can create? She creates like dreamscapes and yeah. It's just all the sonic details. You know, the producers that I love. The person that made me want to make records was Bjork when I heard Vespertine and had it on my headphones. All the little kind of details, and you're just like, your head's going, like, because I love listening on headphones to records. And she has what Kate Bush has. It's that attention to detail, and that, you know, I'm also obviously trying to conjure that in my own production as well. And that fascinates me. I don't want to gender it in any way, but I can't think of many male producers who do it. It's the fine details. I love that, creating a world that you can just immerse yourself in. The only person actually I can think of, I just heard the new Hannah Peel record that's coming out at the end of March. I had a little early sneak peek, and she does something really similar actually, all these little textures and just acute attention to detail, and she's an incredible producer as well. And it's, you should check it out if you don't know it. The album's called Fur Wave. It's end of March it's coming out, I think. Yeah, I'll go and find that. I mean, this is interesting because a lot of people, you know, because the roles are changing music. I know it's not right yet, but there's a lot more women getting performers. You know, it is changing. It's like we're not there. We're not saying it's there. But the one field, people always say there aren't many female producers. But I think, well, there are. They just don't call themselves producers. They just produce records without having the T-shirt, I'm the producer on it. You know, but like Kate Bush does completely control the whole process. She might not engineer the records, but that doesn't matter because a producer doesn't engineer a record. She's got the vision. Like you say, Bjork's got the vision. They have the sound in their heads, and the record ends up sounding like what it sounds like in their heads, which to me is what a producer is. Yeah. So you say bollocks, and I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of us. I know them because we all know each other. And I think what's more interesting is often not, you'll find women are doing it on their own as well, because for many reasons, to be honest, fed up with the way the industry is. And also we tend to be more solitary, you know, we're not in bands. Yesterday, Marianne Hobbs did an all Queens mix. She played one of the Anchoress tracks, she played Hannah Peel, she played Laura Groves. It was all women self-producing artists. There are so many of us. Laura as well, who used to be called Femme. She's an amazing producer. All of, you know, I would probably more struggle to give you the names of male producers working in professional studios at the moment. All of my mates are engineers and producers. They're all women. And I think we're getting better at, you know, putting that at the forefront of our biographies. I think it is about visibility. I had a great conversation in this group that I'm in about this the other day, and saying I think the reason why women are often kind of, it's overlooked that that's part of what they're doing, is because we do work alone. So, and a lot of the work is not visible. You know, it's not on social media. We're not live streaming us twiddling knobs. And then the bit that you do see, like with Bjork, is her singing on stage. So you're not thinking Bjork's the producer because she hasn't got a camera in front of her when she's producing. So it's about us kind of shifting the landscape, I think, to be more visible when we are doing the work that we're doing. You know, so I try and do like Instagram lives from the studio. I'll do lots of behind the scenes, kind of looking at the sessions that I've got, or if I'm producing for another band, I'll make sure that, you know, we're posting on social media saying we're doing this. And it's a slow process, but I think we're getting there, where it's less an eyebrow raising kind of, oh, you produce records. Now it's a little bit more normal.
So it's definitely changing, but it's not changing fast enough.
No.
Maybe you have to go and tell people that you know you have to film yourself producing to inspire the next generation, whether you want to or not. So it's like a poison chalice, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, do you know what? Actually, at the moment, I am teaching half a day a week on a master's in music production. You know, I am working with the next generation, although some of them are, you know, not that much younger than I am. And that's really great because it's 50% women on the course, which is fabulous, you know. And I think it is shifting. I think, you know, the next 10 years, we will see it kind of the balance being redressed a lot more. And I think that'll just make it a much healthier environment as well for everybody. This isn't about, you know, banging a drum for the sake of it. This is just about making the landscape a less toxic one, a less dominated by a particular kind of energy, and just making you know, younger girls coming up and looking and thinking about what they might want to do, do you know what, I really want to do that looks cool. I love technology, I love fiddling with stuff. Like, you know, this idea that women aren't interested in science, like, I did 3 sciences at A level. I love science.
Well, some of the greatest groundbreaking scientists ever are women, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's part of a bigger cultural kind of shift that needs to happen. And, you know, the pandemic is obviously underlining that hugely, that still the burden of childcare, the burden of housework, etc., tends to fall on women. And I think until that has been redressed, you are not going to see the knock-on effects in all of the other industries. You know, we're talking about science, technology, you know, STEM, everything. It's difficult.
The irony of this is actually better for men that this is happening, that a lot of men don't want to be in the band as a gang, swaggery, macho. I mean, some people are really brilliant at that, but not everybody wants to be that kind of bloke. So if you're saying it changes the toxic atmosphere that goes around music, I think a lot of men will be quite relieved. They're not expected to exist in this toxic atmosphere.
It would just be nice to see a lot more kind of variety in the types of, you know, it won't just be, you know, white men in guitar bands. It'll be a lot more different stuff coming through. You know, Slayford Mods are doing something really interesting. I love Billy No Mates as one of my favorite artists at the moment. She is fantastic. You know, self-producing again, and I think doing something again that you wouldn't typically expect of what we've seen before. So much good stuff happening, and I think it's as a result of people being able to make records in their bedrooms, which I came up from in the studio system, you know, the big, expensive, shiny SSL desks system. But I'm still, while I'm maybe mourning the death of that a little bit, I'm really happy that there's a more democratic, I guess, landscape now where you don't have to have the money or access to a big studio in order to make something that sounds great.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was talking about some of that before the pandemic and how much it will change music. Obviously, because we can't play anywhere, that's a big change. But would it change the sound of music? Because we're all constructing music in our bedrooms, sending drum loops backwards and forwards, and you can't sing as loud because the neighbours are in bed. So will we change even the way we sing? Is it going to change? You know, like if you're going to make your next album, and you made your last album, I think probably where you're sat now, does that actually change the way you make the actual music itself?
Well, I think that's been happening for a while anyway. I think the trend and the shift, certainly I see, is that, you know, more and more records are being made on the whole in people's on laptops. I still think there's a place for, you know, those incredibly skilled people to come in and do the final mixes. You know, I will always go to a professional mastering engineer. But, you know, I think that the sonic landscape's been changing for a while. You know, I can spot a record made on Ableton at 10 paces. I know what it sounds like. I think that technology is incredible and we should embrace it rather than being afraid and being a bit kind of, you know, fuddy-duddy about it and thinking, oh, not like it was in my day, you know, the great records in the 90s and all the money spent wasted on, you know, massive residential recording studio records. It's good that it's evolving. I like a hybrid of the two. You know, I did my drums in conch, real drums in a room, you know, but then I do pretty much everything else here because, you know, why would I pay for a studio when I paid for my own studio in my house? That's the whole point. And I think what it enables is a kind of freedom of creativity when you're not thinking, shit, it's costing me £100 today, better get something down. There's a freedom to having your own space and not watching the clock. I'll never make a record any other way now that I've got this complete autonomy. I love it. It's just it's so freeing. It's just fantastic. And obviously it's taken me a while to build up the studio. You know, I couldn't have done that probably without touring with Simple Minds and being able to pay to build the studio that I wanted. But I think it's a great thing. I love all the records I'm hearing that are made on people's laptops. So Billy No Mates, if you don't know her, listen to her new record. Incredible.
Oh, I know. I did the first interview.
Oh, you've interviewed her. She's so cool.
No, she's amazing. Yeah.
You can imagine we've got a lot in common. We like DM on Twitter a bit. We were like, yeah. We there may be some swearing.
So the entry band for you was the Manics, wasn't it? And you still obviously have a residue of interest in the Manics because you're still dressing in the classic old school Manics fan style. I mean, what was it particularly about them?
James is on the new record.
Yeah, I know.
It's a new record too. So residue of interest. I love that. It's interesting because they're my gateway bands, but not. I wouldn't say to wanting to be a musician because they didn't make me want to be a musician. They made me want to go to university, and that's the difference. No, I love them and they're incredible, but I think they've inspired more people to get a PhD. I think Nikki said, you know, or write a book than they have maybe to form bands. But for me, you know, what it was about them was, you know, I grew up on a council estate, despite this accent that I now have from going to university. I was destined to work as my sister does in a call centre. Not there's anything wrong with that, but there was no sense of ambition beyond that. I was a very geeky, very strange child who was bullied and didn't have a great time at school. And for me, they changed everything because it was like suddenly, here's a band from where I come from, you know, from where my family's from. They are super glamorous and they're really smart, but people aren't bullying them. People are going, oh my God, they're really cool. And that was just a massive, like, I can't even think of the right word, just a tidal wave in terms of my worldview. It was like, you can be smart and glamorous? What? Because to me, it was like, if you're smart, people like push you off a wall. People punch you in the face at school. That was my experience. So suddenly it was like, rather than trying to pretend that I didn't like books and that I didn't have ambition, it was a bit of a kind of like, you wear it on the outside now. So I'm wearing like leopard print shirts and just writing down all the books they're talking about in their interviews. You know, I'd be on the internet like searching for scans of old interviews and just became like this kind of research queen. I owe them everything. And, you know, and Steve Lamacq too, because that's where I heard the band and was like, what is this? This is, I don't know if I like it. It sounds really weird and loud. And, you know, I would potentially be my sister. I love my sister, but that's not the life I want. But I could have her life if it wasn't for them. They changed everything.
It was interesting with them, wasn't it? Because they deliberately played a very conventional form of rock music, but all these nuances and subtleties in it, which rock music like of that sound never normally has. So that, again, like your music has two kind of things going on at the same time. Theirs does as well, but in a very different way.
Yeah, but when you're 12 and you hear the Manics the first time, you don't know all the things they're referencing. You've never heard. I'm just trying to think. You never really heard Guns N' Roses. You never heard, Magazine. You've never heard Joy Division. So a kid coming to it, it's like when you listen to Nirvana and you haven't heard the Pixies. You don't know what they're referencing, and all I heard was the amazing lyrics. That was, for me, was like, what? Plath, Pinter? What is this? I'm writing it all down. It was just like this of input and information that I was just like, I want to know all this stuff that they know, because they're super cool and they look great and I want to be like them. Which is why it's mind-blowing for me when I play with them or James calls me up or something. It's just like, they want to be my friend. I'm still a bit like, oh my God, it's kind of cool.
He's a very generous musician, isn't he? Because he does a lot of work, a lot of other people, and gives an awful lot away as well.
Yeah, he's a great human being and just a fellow workaholic, I think is fair to say. And just, a super lovely, just very empathetic person as well. When I've been going through the shit that I've been through, call me up and just check, how I'm doing and check in with me, just as, what rock stars do that, eh?
Yeah.
Who does that?
He's an interesting character, wasn't he? Because his role in the band initially he was the rocker guy who could write tunes, and Nicky and Richie were the sensitive, booklist, artistic, literate ones. But in the end, you start to realise, of course, they were amazing, but you start to think, actually, James is quite fascinating, isn't he? Because not only does he make all those bizarre lyrics, fantastic lyrics, work melodically, but he actually sings them with a complete understanding.
He's very, very well read. And I think he hides his light under a bushel a little bit, I think. I don't think people realise he is, incredibly intelligent, incredibly smart and quick-witted. But also, I don't think it is a hyperbole to say that he's a musical genius. I mean, what musician can take something like Faster as a lyric or Design for Life and come up with a hit anthemic song like that? His work ethic is just incredible. I remember him telling me once, how he wrote, I think, 60 versions of Faster before he came to the finished song. And I was just blown away by this complete and utter dedication to his craft. He's an incredible producer and arranger, and just it must be a bit weird and frustrating for him often be thought of the singer in the Manics. It's like, the singer in the Manics, he just does it all basically. No, I think he doesn't get his dues always, I think, as what incredible guitarist he is as well. Having him play on the album, I was just like blown away by, he doesn't read music and he was just like coming up with this incredible stuff just off the bat. He's such an intuitive musician.
And you could tell that when he sings. He's got one of those kind of very melodic voices that everything he sings sounds like a very complex melody. But for him, he's got some words. He's just singing it.
Well, you like me have been in the same room as him when he just sings a cappella, right? And the sheer volume, you're like, oh, I'm going to fall over because it's so loud. It is a force of nature, literally. When we'd be rehearsing backstage before going on, I remember we did it, I think it was Manchester Arena, and we just ran through quickly Your Love Alone, and I'm just like, try not to be overwhelmed by this massive sound that's coming out. He's just super talented, super lovely. What more could you ask for? It's nice to meet your idols and not be disappointed.
Yes, it's important, and I'll be very disappointed if the Manics. That'd be disappointing.
Never going to happen.
But the other great thing about them is I think you talk about what they look like and the whole thing. They kind of dreamt it all themselves, and it was homemade, and you could tell it was homemade. It was a homemade glamour from a small Welsh sort of village up a hill. There was nothing There's no designers. I mean, and designers can be great for bands. They can have, it's another art form. But the Manics had actually done it with felt tip pens and secondhand clothes and managed to create something magical out of nothing. And I think that's quite inspirational as well, isn't it?
Yeah, see, I didn't know a lot of this until, do you know what? Shamefully, I only listened to Terry Hall did a podcast, a Manics podcast, a couple of months ago, and I hadn't listened to the episode until recently. And she was talking about all of this, and I hadn't realised what a cottage industry it was. The band were living with her and Philip when they got married, and all of the spray painting the t-shirts in the lounge, and that just, again, it feels like a very familiar experience to me, because that's been my route up too. It's a cottage industry, you kind of do it all yourself, there's no kind of big team around you, and I think it is, you can't fail when you do that, because you're pouring yourself literally into the whole aesthetic. And also Nikki looks great in a dress, so what's not to like about that? Still looks great in a dress. He's got better legs than I have.
And I always think of them as being five, because I know Patrick really well, and I know he's got an important role in it. And the book and music swapping was going on between this. Obviously, at their school, they're going to be completely the outsiders. This very tight unit of like sort of quirky, very intelligent kids, just with a thirst for culture as well.
Yeah, Patrick doesn't get his due, does he? Because I didn't meet him until 2019. And just got a real sense of how much he is responsible, that trickle-down effect for so many of the books that they were reading. And then in turn, I was like, you're basically responsible for my education.
he won't have it. I said that to him as well. He goes, yeah, it wasn't me. I could just tell you're the older brother who had the Rush album, but understood there was something to them more than everyone else could hear. You're the older brother who had the Clash records. You're the one who had the book collection.
Yeah, now obviously come full circle with him writing the lyrics for James's recent solo record as well, which is, I think, such a nice kind of, not a completion of the circle, but it's coming back to the beginning in a way, isn't it, of it all?
Well, he's a great poet.
He is fun, and again, a lovely human being. So nice. It's just I think that's the great thing about the band, not to keep rhapsodizing about them. It's like they've just never really lost that kind of sense of where they're from, and that kind of feet on the ground. And this industry can be really strange, and I've seen many of my friends or former friends lost to it and change and turn into people that are not the people that I knew, and that it's a miraculous thing. And I see that with Simple Minds as well, and I have no doubt it's something to do with that kind of working class culture and surrounding yourself with the same people and keeping that tight team. It means that you don't ever get sort of too caught up in your own myth. I think it's really important. I've worked with those two working class bands who've done it for the long haul, who are, just great people still, and that's hard to maintain that over that many years.
I think generally the core of the bands is usually, from my experience, is always pretty good and pretty pure to the idea and the art. It's just the kind of more the surrounding parts when it starts to get a bit wonky, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think if you keep your original kind of team with you, the ones that knew you when you were just starting out, I think that's a good way to kind of keep yourself humble and keep it real. If you can say that.
The other key thing about you is you have a very literate background as well. I mean, you're a, well, for want of a better word, academic literature. So would you ever write a book? I mean, you've written a book, haven't you? I think
I have, yeah. So to be honest, the reason I'm an academic is because it was a way for me to earn a living. So I got paid to do my master's and my PhD, so then I could stay in London and make a record. I couldn't have afforded to have done that otherwise. I got a research grant. So I was making confessions alongside doing my PhD at the same time, and had a couple of jobs too. And that... Sorry, I'm trying to remember what the question was. What was the question?
Yeah, well, what's kind of leading to is it? Would you be able, is it writing a book?
Oh yes,
yeah.
So obviously, I did.
As compared to writing a song, because can you get it all into 3 minutes? That's very difficult, but it's doable. That's the art of it, which leads back to Tori Amos. Actually, there is an art to almost getting a whole book into a song, but there's also an art to writing a book as well to keep the thread.
It's actually something I've been approached about recently by publisher about potentially doing something, I'm just very what's the word? I'm very reverent of writing as an art form and aware that it's not just something you can kind of jump into and be good at it. So I think if I was going to do it, I would want to have some time away from making music in order to hone my craft, I think, and make sure I did a good job and not just be one of those musicians who writes a book. But my PhD was turned into a book by Bloomsbury, but it's very heavy going. I wouldn't recommend it as a light Sunday afternoon read. But yeah, I'm sure at some point in my life I will turn my hand to the page. But if I'm going to do it, like anything I do, it's got to be of a quality and of a standard. And yeah, carve me out a few years to maybe write a novel or something.
Isn't this the time to do it? This is the there's no distractions and nothing going on.
That's a very good point. It's too late now, isn't it? I think if I hadn't have, I had the Bernard Butler collaborative record come out in the summer, and obviously we've been building up to the release of The Art Losing too, and it's been such a busy time, even though I haven't been touring. The amount of work and effort that goes into putting together a campaign and releasing an album is just nuts. Having to make videos in lockdown, which has meant that we've been super creative. I've had to teach myself how to edit video. I've never been so busy.
Yeah, that's the irony.
I wish I'd had the time to write a novel as well, but maybe next lockdown, lockdown 4.0, when Boris Johnson fucks it up again, that'll be the novel.
Well, I mean, there will be future lockdowns, but not as long. I mean, he is an idiot, but it's not his fault. He's made a lot of mistakes, but we're dealing with something that's hard to deal with,
Yeah, well, I might respectfully disagree that it isn't. The government hasn't got a huge part to play in the way it's panned out. If you look at other countries, it's been a catalogue of.
Oh no, I'm not sticking up for him. I mean, there's a lot of corruption, a lot of mistakes, but it's across most of the Western world. I mean, I always think the virus itself was a mirror held up to every country, its people, and its government. So. In America, it's like pretend it doesn't happen. Nobody dies, like we talked about before. It doesn't exist. In Russia initially, it's like we're so tough, we're not going to catch it. And here we'll muddle our way through like Dad's Army or something.
That's a really good way of putting it. Actually, it is a mirror, isn't it? Because it's showing us the kind of the worst of our kind of national characteristics, and also, I guess, the cracks in the system. You look at New Zealand and the incredible way they've handled it, and even Australia, the low, I think it's only 900 and something deaths in Australia. It's incredible differences. I am just so disgusted and so sickened by the way that some people still think it's a hoax. It just and it just goes to it's that mentality is until it touches you, it doesn't exist, and that's a very conservative mentality that I guess I'm just not familiar with. I've always cared about things that don't affect me directly, because we're a big organism, and the virus is showing us that, like I said, it's been a long year for me of not going to the supermarket. I know it's a small sacrifice, but it's
well, they're all hard to deal. The small things could be the hardest thing to deal with sometimes.
It's the impact on your mental health is huge. Me and my mum have both been shielding. It's a year now. She's a hugely sociable person normally, and it's hard. It's difficult. Obviously not as hard as getting COVID and ending up in intensive care, but it's the long-term impact on everyone's mental health. Hopefully it will force us as a country to look at that too, and to look at the lack of funding and infrastructure there, because there's going to be a big fallout.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all pans out. So but finally, get to the end of this, but finally return to literature again. Is it the actual power of words and all the sound of them, all the suggestions that fascinates you? And as a musician who's into literature, do you actually find the melody of the words fascinating?
As someone who studied poetry in particular, obviously I must be particularly drawn to the meter and the rhythm of words, which I think is where there's that kind of crossover with lyrics and songwriting. But for me, it's about the ideas behind the words. I think literature for me, and books and novels, as a kid, was a world that I could escape into. I didn't have a very happy childhood, and opening a book was a world I could dive into where my reality was different. And I think that's the power of music too, and we're seeing that now in the pandemic, aren't we? And I think what I've always striven to do as the Anchoress is also create those alternative universes. I want a space to which you can pop your headphones on, dip a toe in and jump into this other world. And, you know, we've never needed that more than now. So it's about the escapism of it, I think. And also the paths it leads you down, you know, to new discoveries, new ways of thinking, new ways of looking at things. And I always want to challenge myself. I want to be constantly evolving and not be stuck in a certain way of looking at the world. And only books can do that.
Which is brilliant, because it's a summation for your craft there. You know, this creating something to escape into a different world, because that was the world that you needed yourself growing up, and to a certain extent now, but also a world that's not airy-fairy, a world that deals with the realities. And those, you know, the dreamscapes and the realities they're all part of the same space, aren't they?
Yeah, I always think of it like a David Lynch kind of dreamscape, in the way that his are very brutal. You know, you look at Inland Empire as a film, which is one of my favourites, or Mulholland Drive. These are not alternative realities that are fairy tales. It's, you know, an Angela Carter twisted fairy tale, because it's holding a mirror up, like you said, to ourselves. And that's what I'm interested in. It's something that is an education for ourselves, I guess. You're never going to step into the Anchoress's world and have a lovely holiday. You're going to learn something about yourself, hopefully, and about some subjects that you didn't know about. God, that sounds like it's like homeschooling on a record.
No, it sounds amazing.
Homeschooling.
So in a sense, it's like a magic realism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, basically, you don't need to homeschool your kids. Just buy The Art of Losing, put it on in the background, give them the booklet that's got some quotes in from different books. You're away. You've got a week to yourself while they learn about burial rituals in Eastern culture.
That's my kind of record.